Anytime there's a movie or TV adaptation of a popular book series, anyone who's read the book is gonna tell you that the book was better. But in some cases, I liked the movies better than the books that they were adapted from. So today I'm talking about 4 books that were turned into movies where I liked the movies better than the book. So the first book that I want to talk about is KickAss. I love a graphic novel, and this graphic novel series is super popular. It's also very, very dark and very gory. I saw the KickAss movie before I read the graphic novel, so that does, I think, impact my opinion on why I like the movie better. But I also think the movie has a sense of humor to it and a lightheartedness that I think the comic book lacks. So what the premise is we've got Dave Lazowski. Is that how you say it? Lazowski? Close enough. Dave Lazowski, who is just like a regular high school teenager who just like decides to be a superhero. And he actually just puts on a superhero costume and goes and fights crime. And the way it plays out is pretty realistically how that would play out if a high school kid just decided to go fight crime. But he finds these characters, Big Daddy and Hit Girl. And Big Daddy in the movie is played by Nicolas Cage, which is iconic. And Hit Girl, of course, was my favorite character. Of course, I'm obsessed with Hit Girl. And I mean, it's pretty obvious why. We have the same hairstyle. So I loved the movie so much. I thought it was really just smart and funny and witty. And the book series, when I did finally actually sit down and read the comic books, I was surprised by how gory they were. And the movies are very gory. There's a lot of action, there's a lot of blood in the films, and the books are even gorier. And I think they also just have a darkness and a sadness that kind of made me a little uncomfortable. In the movie, there really is a sense of humor in the way that they talk and the way things kind of play out that definitely lightens it. Especially in the movie Kick-Ass 2, they take some of the extremely violent scenes and definitely make them less violent. And I do prefer that. I can do some violence and gore, but honestly, not my thing. Not my thing. So when it's in a fun, funny, dark comedy kind of context, I think it's a lot of fun. But I think the movies are dark comedies, whereas the books are just dark. And I really need that lighthearted comedy element if I'm gonna get through this. So keeping with the theme of graphic novel superheroes, let's talk about the Umbrella Academy. So if you don't know the premise of the Umbrella Academy, basically what happens is that it sort of starts off in a world where all of these random women just suddenly start popping out superhero babies. It's not explained, no one understands why, it just happens and you just have to accept it. So all these random women have superhero babies, and this one weird rich man decides to adopt as many of the superhero babies as he can. He gets 7, and he's trying to basically turn them into his own little child superhero cults, trying to create his own Avengers but with superhero children. He's trying to be the Nick Fury in his own universe, and he's really giving more evil, kind of fucked up, but hey, he tried it. He had a vision and he went for it. So that's sort of how it all gets started. And then you see sort of these superhero people as adults now, and how being raised by this guy in this sort of context and environment fucked them all up. The comic books are a Gerard Way creation, and trust and believe, I love Gerard Way. I mean, you can probably tell on sight that I am a fan of the band My Chemical Romance. But in this specific comic book, I feel like the writing is just totally all over the place. I couldn't ever get a clear grip on what was going on when I read the comic books. In the show, they do a good job of putting things together so that you can actually follow what's happening. Like, no matter how crazy or outlandish the concept is or whatever is going on in the story, they tell it in a way where you can understand and you can follow it. The comic books are not like that. Like, the amount of times when I was reading the comic book series that I was like, what is happening? And again, very similar to KickAss, the TV show has a sense of fun and lightheartedness that the book doesn't really have. The comics are very dark and grim, you know, and pretty, they're downers. Whereas like the show has its moments where, you know, it's dealing with the very like real scary concepts that the comic books do, but also it has a sense of humor and a sense of fun. And I really like the way the characters are explored more in the TV show. And the TV show, from the second season, immediately they go and take a completely different storyline turn. The storyline that they do for seasons 2 and 3 are completely different from what happens in the second and third Umbrella Academy comic books. And I think that was correct. Like, the storyline that the show came up with is better than what was in the comic books. You can see that there's a lot more character growth. The story is just more interesting in the show, and the way that things play out are a lot more engaging, a lot more fun to watch. And I was definitely significantly less confused watching the show as I was when I was reading the comic books. Because let me tell you, I did not know what was going on in the comic books. But I love the show and I think it's amazing, and I'm so glad that they were able to adapt it, because it really is a great show, and I like seeing this really cool idea actually executed in a way that, I guess, in a way that works for me, in a way that I like. So the next book that I want to talk about is The School for Good and Evil by Soman Chainani. And here's the thing about this. I did see the movie first, which I think always impacts which one you like more, whatever you see first. That's gonna leave the initial impression. Basically what happens in the story is that you got a school for good and you got a school for evil. And they go together, but kids basically just get separated as like heroes versus villains. It's giving Sky High. Anyone remember Sky High? It's kind of like that. And you have these two girls named Sophie and Agatha. Agatha is very much like, she's goth, she's quirky, she's different, she's not like other girls. I related to her in that way. She's very witchy, she wears all black, people think she's creepy, and she's not super friendly to everyone, kind of got some social awkwardness, you know. And then you got Sophie, and Sophie is very girly, very focused on being pretty and helpful to people. She's really trying to be like the main character, you know, like she's living her main character fantasy, and she is letting you know that she is that girl. She wants to be this perfect Disney princess so bad, and she tries so hard. So then when they end up getting sent to the School for Good and Evil, it feels like there's a mix-up, because Agatha gets sent to the School for Good and Sophie gets sent to the School for Evil. And definitely, really neither of them are happy about that. They both feel like there was a mix-up, like something went wrong. And so the whole like story is them like exploring that. So my biggest problem with the books versus the movie is that the books have a lot of misogyny and a lot of very like kind of cruel patriarchal ideas that are sort of held up, where the movie very intelligently kind of cuts that out. Like, for example, in the book, Sophie's narration, she's always talking about how fat and ugly people are, and that it makes you a bad person to be fat and ugly. And she's very critical of her friends, the people who support her the most, and talking about their appearances so negatively. The fat phobia in the book is very gross. And I think for Sophie to be a protagonist type character, even though like, I think you're supposed to know that she's wrong for saying these things, it's not super clear, where I feel like, especially because this is a children's book, I don't want children reading this and kind of getting the wrong message about how you should talk about people. I don't want people to look at Sophie's behavior as being okay when she talks about people like that and root for that. I personally couldn't root for her in the books because of the way she talked about people. And the movie really doesn't do that the way that the book does. And that's a reason why I like the movie better. I think the movie also has more of a feminist energy to it than the book does. The movie feels like it's kind of doing a commentary on what good and evil really means. When I watched the movie, I felt like they were playing around with a lot of tropes. And even though they were doing the tropes, they were also kind of like making fun of the tropes and like twisting them around. With the book, I think that was the intention, was to play around with tropes. It's just not executed well. The last book to movie adaptation that I want to talk about is The Hunger Games. And let me just start off by saying that I love The Hunger Games, and for the most part, no, I do not think the movies are better than the books. I think the books are better for the first two. My issue is when we get to Mockingjay. Mockingjay is the third Hunger Games book, and it's kind of a letdown, to be honest. I mean, if you haven't read The Hunger Games, man, just get into it. Just get into it. Like, where have you been, girl? Get into it. But when it comes to Mockingjay, that's the one that has the least action, even though it is the final book. In The Hunger Games, you have The Hunger Games. Then in Catching Fire, you have The Quarter Quell, where there's just like a lot of action. You know, Mockingjay has a lot of like long drawn out scenes of Katniss being depressed. And she's valid, she's right, and I would be depressed too. But it is more like slow paced, kind of just a downer, kind of a letdown of a book. I still think it's a really good book, but it is sort of like disappointing after reading the other two in the series. What I liked about the movie adaptation is that they did make some changes to make it a little more fun. Did Mockingjay need to be adapted into 2 parts? Did it need to be a 2-part movie? No, it didn't, because that's the book that the least amount of things happen in. But what I do appreciate about a movie adaptation is that you can cut out a lot of those like long, slow, drawn out scenes. I also liked that they brought Effie into the picture. Effie was not in Mockingjay the book, but they brought her into the movie, and I think she added a lot. I think that was a really good addition. That like Suzanne Collins, I mean, if I was writing the book, I would have done that, you know? So I think that the Mockingjay movie, even though it did not need to be 2 parts, did do a better job of just getting right to the point instead of sort of like being a long, drawn out, depressing moment. So that's my take on that. I do think that when it comes to the other Hunger Games books, the books are better than the movies. I mean, usually in any case, but when I first read Mockingjay, I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. And then watching the movies when they came out made me want to give Mockingjay another chance and reread it. And definitely rereading it as an adult versus being a high schooler, I did appreciate Mockingjay more. But I did still feel like there were a lot of moments where I was like, let's just get to the point. So those were a few times when I actually liked the movie better than the book. And it may be a little controversial if these are books that you love. You might find these to be some hot takes and maybe not necessarily good ones. But I will say, not the most controversial takes that I've given. If you haven't seen my last video, I talk about books that I absolutely hated. And all of them are very popular, well-loved books. So definitely go check that one out if you haven't seen it. And also leave a comment if you have any movie adaptations that you thought were better than the book, or if you disagreed with anything that I said, let me know. All right, thanks guys. Bye.